Corruption and greed is clearly evident, not only in the financial industry, but also in the political system and all of the major corporations. We're looking at this on a level we have never seen before, and it is getting worse. So let's take a look at the leaked documents revealing the global secret tax scheme. You came here for the truth, so let me unveil that for you. First, I would like to discuss this out of the Washington Post. Post-analysis of Dow 30 firms shows a declining tax burden as a share of profits. Now, if you look at all of these, where the talking heads come together, the technocrats, and they decide what we are going to be facing in the future. They say the individual needs to pay more tax. They are always creating new taxes, whether it's the carbon tax or any other thing. They always find a way to increase the burden, for example, austerity, upon the public. But the individual corporations, however, are seeing less and less of their profits diminishing. Let's go into what they said here. I'm just going to scroll down very briefly. And it said most of the 30 companies listed on the country's most famous stock index, the Dow Jones Industrial Average, have seen a dramatically smaller percentage of their profits go to U.S. coffers over time, even as their share prices have driven the Dow to an all-time high. That's right, because the companies are allowed to increase their profits at the same time the individual citizen gets the short end of the stick. We see this in all different cases. I've covered it here, and we're just looking at this getting worse. But this is what I want to note. You have the stock exchanges rising to all-time high. You have corporate profits all-time high or near all-time high. And at the same time, there is a growing disparity in between the rich and the poor. So that is something very, very telling. Now let's get into the big news of the day, and that is this. Out of ICIJ, leaked documents expose global companies' secret tax deals in Luxembourg. This is big news, and they're describing exactly how this works. I'd also like to mention that previous article. It is very, very detailed. I just covered it briefly, but I would definitely recommend reading it. Now, this one is very serious. Let's look at this. Pepsi, IKEA, FedEx, and 340 other international companies have secured secret deals from Luxembourg, allowing many of them to slash their global tax bills while maintaining little presence in the tiny European duchy. Leaked documents show. That's how they do this. You as the individual, you need to continue to have increased taxation. And then you have the upper middle class, those individuals who may own the small businesses. They're being taxed heavily right now because of their earning, perhaps earning over $125,000 depending on the country. They're going to be taxed so heavily, and they don't have these kind of tax shelters that the rich do. The real rich, the Warren Buffetts, and all of these major corporations that have shareholders and all of this type of business, you don't have that as the individual. So you don't get the tax loopholes. You don't get a place to shelter your money. You have to go there and buy your groceries with your 9-to-5 job, and that just doesn't add up anymore. And that's been going on for decades now. We've seen people who are struggling now that perhaps in the recent past wouldn't have been in this situation. We've seen many people that were supposed to go into retirement but simply can't afford it, and the government will not help. So let's look at just one more thing here that they said. The landlocked European duchy has been called magical fairyland for a brand name corporation seeking to drastically reduce tax bills. And that's right. And you see this kind of thing where you have the corporations like Google, and you have General Motors, General Electric. These companies pay essentially no taxes, and they're able to get away with all of this criminality because their people are in the government. That's the way this works. The revolving door has been very, very helpful to them. I'll move on very quickly just to say this. This is out of Bloomberg. Ex-Fed examiner claims firing for finding Goldman lapses. So if you find this kind of information and you start to bring it up to your company, or if you're in the government and you see this and you start to bring it up, you're going to be fired. And let's look at what they said. A former senior bank examiner for the Federal Reserve Bank of New York sued her ex-employer, claiming she was fired because she refused to change the findings that Goldman Sachs lacked the firm-wide conflict of interest policy. They're able to do whatever they want. Half of Goldman Sachs works for the US government. I mean, this is crazy to look at it when you see how many people keep changing hands on either side. It is so extreme. And here it is, one example where they're being fired for telling the truth. You're not allowed to tell the truth. The truth is something that needs to be kept under wraps. In my book, I wrote about this, about the TARP program, Troubled Asset Relief Program. You may have heard of it. I'm sure you have. The original legislation in Congress allocated $700 billion to purchase toxic assets. Instead, it was used to bail out corporations such as GM and Chrysler. Also, a large chunk of the TARP money was used to nearly 700 financial institutions. Okay, so instead of buying up that garbage debt, which I'm not even a fan of, but they just handed it off to corporations like GM and Chrysler. And then what does GM do? They go and open up factories in China and Brazil. They're not using the money to help out the individual citizen. That's why we need to get the government out of the way. This is crazy how they're able to take our money in this sort of socialist totalitarian system that they've set up. They take the money and they use it to give to their friends. It doesn't make any sense for the individual to allow this to happen. And this connects in with this. Ultimately, the individual citizen is getting the short end of the stick. As I said, this is out of the AP. As coal jobs vanish, miners search for new careers. We're looking at the manufacturing jobs. We're looking at all of the different types of real well-paying jobs that have moved overseas. And especially with coal, we're looking at this as Obama has bankrupted coal, and all that has done has moved the factories, the coal mining, over into countries like China, where they don't care about the pollution. They will pollute it all to the into the earth, and quite frankly, the coal factories in China are significantly dirtier than the coal factories in the US. But of course, they don't care about that. It's all about basically shutting down the economy here and then allowing the factories to open up over there. It is a very, very smart system for the globalist elite. I would like to discuss just very briefly, connecting in with this out of Peak Prosperity. This is John Hussman saying, in every market cycle that we've seen, with the mild exception of 2002, we've seen stock prices revert back to normal rates of return. In order to get to that point from here, we would need to have equities drop by about half. Now, am I agreeing with that? Well, definitely it should drop by at least half. But will we see that? That's another question. I don't think so without some sort of interest rate increase if they do so. So we'll need to pay attention, as I've said many times before, the interest rates being the most important factor here. This individual, who is very well recommended, is definitely saying that we're in for a big crash. We'll see where it goes, but the individual will always be unfortunately shortchanged in this, because the stock prices, whether they go up or down, doesn't seem to be doing any good, because the conditions continue to get worse regardless. It's not making anything cheaper for people in a sort of deflationary mode. It is simply just making everything worse. And this is how things are changing. We're looking at Russia and China and the BRIC nations collecting together as they see the system falling apart. They're quickly becoming more and more friends. This is it. Putin and I can't pronounce the name, the Chinese prime minister here, saying they signed this mega gas deal on the second gas supply route. And this says that the agreement paves the way for a contract that would make China the biggest consumer of Russian gas. Big deals are happening, and this is really going to tell the future. When they're looking at the Western nations and they're saying, we don't want to be a part of a system that is falling apart, and that is something that is really been showing its light right now. And we know that this is going to be a big disaster. There's going to be a big change in the future, whether they're going to choose another currency or regardless of what happens. We can see that China and Russia and the rest of the BRIC nations do witness this happening, as we do on this channel here, everything falling apart. And if you found this informative, please give me a thumbs up. And don't forget to become an insider. The Insiders is where I give out all my best intel for free, and that is available at themoneygps.com. Scroll down to the bottom, fill in your email address, and you get occasional emails from me with good, short, concise info.